Good morning, beloved friend. As you wake to face this new day, I want you to pause for just a moment and breathe deeply. Yes, right there where you are, whether you're still nestled under warm covers or already moving through your morning routine, I want to speak directly to your heart today. You know, there's something profound about the moment we first open our eyes each morning. In that gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness, our minds begin to stir with the weight of what lies ahead. Maybe today you're carrying concerns that kept you restless through the night. Perhaps you're facing a situation that feels overwhelming, a challenge that seems too big, or circumstances that have left you feeling small and uncertain. I want to tell you something that might change everything about how you step into today. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 41, verse 10, God speaks words that have comforted millions of hearts across thousands of years, words that were written not just for the people of ancient Israel, but for you, right here, right now, in this very moment. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Did you feel that? Did something shift in your spirit as those words washed over you? This isn't just a beautiful verse to hang on your wall or share on social media. This is God's personal promise to you, His beloved child, spoken with the same power that created the heavens and the earth. Today we're going to dive deep into this incredible passage and discover how these ancient words can transform your modern struggles. We're going to explore what it really means when God says fear not, and why His presence changes absolutely everything about your circumstances. But more than that, we're going to learn how to carry this truth with us into every moment of uncertainty, every season of struggle, and every situation that tries to steal our peace. Before we begin, I want you to know that if you found this message today, it's not by accident. The same God who numbers every hair on your head orchestrated this moment. He knew you needed to hear these words, and He's about to meet you exactly where you are. Now, let's start by understanding something crucial about fear. Fear isn't just an emotion we experience when we're facing danger. Fear is one of the most powerful forces that shapes human behavior, and it often masquerades as wisdom, caution, or even common sense. Fear whispers lies in the quiet moments, telling us we're not equipped, not prepared, not strong enough for what lies ahead. Think about the last time you felt truly afraid. Maybe it was receiving unexpected news from a doctor. Perhaps it was the fear of losing someone you love, or the anxiety of not knowing how you'll provide for your family. Maybe it's the fear of failure that keeps you paralyzed, unable to step into the calling God has placed on your life. Fear has a way of magnifying our problems while minimizing God's power. It makes mountains out of molehills and giants out of grasshoppers. It causes us to focus so intensely on what could go wrong that we completely lose sight of the God who holds all things together. But here's what I want you to understand. When God says, fear not, He's not dismissing your concerns or telling you that your struggles aren't real. He's not saying that difficult things won't happen or that life will always be easy. Instead, He's giving you the ultimate antidote to fear. He's reminding you of a truth so powerful that it has the ability to completely transform how you face every challenge. The phrase, fear not, appears in various forms throughout Scripture over 300 times. 300 times. That's not coincidence. God knows that we, His children, are prone to fear. He understands our human tendency to worry, to anxiety, to feeling overwhelmed by circumstances beyond our control. And so again and again throughout His Word, He reminds us, do not be afraid. But notice that God doesn't just tell us what not to do. He doesn't leave us hanging with a command without providing the power to obey it. Immediately after fear not, He gives us the reason we can live without fear. For I am with you. Those 5 simple words change everything. For I am with you. Not, I will be with you someday, or I was with you yesterday. Present tense. Right now, in this moment, in your current situation, in your deepest struggle, in your greatest uncertainty. I am with you. When God says I am, He's using the same name He revealed to Moses at the burning bush. It's the name that encompasses all of His character, all of His power, all of His love. It means He is the eternally present one, the self-existent, all-sufficient God who lacks nothing and needs nothing, yet chooses to be intimately involved in the details of your life. Let that sink in for a moment. The creator of the universe, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, the one who holds the stars in their courses and knows the number of grains of sand on every shore, that God is with you, not just aware of you from a distance, but actively, personally, intimately with you. This changes everything about how we view our circumstances. When fear tries to convince you that you're facing your battles alone, God's presence reminds you that you have the mightiest ally in the universe standing beside you. When anxiety whispers that you don't have what it takes, His presence declares that His strength is made perfect in your weakness. But God doesn't stop there. He continues, "Be not dismayed, for I am your God." The word dismayed carries the idea of being broken down, overwhelmed or scattered. It's that feeling when life hits you so hard that you feel like you're falling apart, when circumstances are so overwhelming that you can't think straight, when everything seems to be unraveling at once. God says, don't let yourself be broken down by what you're facing, because I am your God. Not just a God, not just the God of someone else. Your God. Personal, intimate, committed to you specifically. Think about what that means. If someone is your doctor, they're committed to your health. If someone is your lawyer, they're dedicated to your legal well-being. If someone is your friend, they care about what happens to you. But when the Almighty God of the universe declares that He is your God, He's pledging the full weight of His character, His power, His love, and His resources to your situation. This is where many believers miss the incredible depth of this promise. We sometimes think of God as a distant deity who occasionally intervenes in human affairs when He feels like it. But Isaiah 41:10 reveals a God who has personally invested Himself in your well-being. He's not just watching from heaven to see how things turn out. He's actively engaged, personally committed, and eternally devoted to your good. When you truly grasp this truth, it transforms how you pray. Instead of approaching God as a stranger, hoping He might be willing to help, you come to Him as a child approaches a loving father. You don't have to convince Him to care about your situation. He already cares more deeply than you can imagine. You don't have to twist His arm to get His attention. You already have His full attention. But perhaps the most powerful part of this verse comes next. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Notice the repetition. I will. 3 promises, each building on the last, each more powerful than what came before. I will strengthen you. This isn't just emotional encouragement or positive thinking. This is God Himself imparting His divine strength into your human weakness. When you feel like you can't take another step, He strengthens you. When you feel like you can't face another day, He strengthens you. When the weight of your circumstances feels crushing, He strengthens you. This strength isn't something you have to manufacture or maintain. It's not dependent on your faith level or your spiritual maturity. It's God's strength, freely given, constantly available, perfectly suited to whatever you're facing. Yes, I will help you. God doesn't just give you strength and then leave you to figure out how to use it. He actively helps you. He gets involved in the practical details of your situation. He opens doors that need to be opened, closes doors that need to be closed, brings the right people at the right time, provides resources you didn't know existed, and works fully understand. Think about this for behind the scenes in ways you may never a moment. The God who controls the weather is helping you. The God who commands angels is helping you. The God who owns cattle on 1,000 hills is helping you. The God who knows the end from the beginning is helping you navigate whatever you're facing right now. And finally, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The right hand, in biblical times, represented power and honor. When someone sat at the right hand of a king, it meant they had access to all the king's resources and authority. When His righteous right hand, God says He will uphold you with saying that all of His power, all of His authority, all of His resources are engaged on your behalf. But notice that it's His righteous right hand. This means that His help comes with perfect justice, perfect timing, and perfect wisdom. He's not just powerful, He's perfectly good. He's not just strong, He's absolutely trustworthy. Everything He does in your situation flows from His perfect character and His perfect love for you. My friend, I want you to imagine for a moment what your life would look like if you truly lived as though these promises were not just words on a page, but absolute reality. What would change if you woke up every morning with the deep, unshakable knowledge that the Creator of the universe has personally committed Himself to your well-being? You see, Most of us live as though we're starring in a movie where we're the hero, facing all the challenges alone, desperately trying to figure out how to overcome every obstacle through our own strength and wisdom. But Isaiah 41:10 reveals a completely different story. In this story, you're not the lone hero struggling against impossible odds. You're the beloved child of the most powerful being in existence, and he's already written the victory into your story. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was a single mother of 3, working 2 jobs just to keep youngest son, was diagnosed with a serious the lights on, when her ability crashed down on her like a tsunami. The medical condition requiring expensive treatment, the weight of impos medical bills alone would bankrupt her. The time off work would cost her both jobs. The fear was so overwhelming that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think clearly. But Sarah had a grandmother who had taught her to pray Isaiah 41:10 whenever fear tried to paralyze her. So there in the hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, Sarah whispered these words through her tears, "Fear not, for you are with me. Be not dismayed, for you are my God. You will strengthen me. Yes, you will help me. You will uphold me with your righteous right hand." What happened next didn't make sense from any human perspective. A nurse mentioned a specialized program she'd never heard of. A social worker appeared with resources no one had told her existed. A doctor volunteered his services. A community she didn't even know was paying attention rallied around her family. Within weeks, what seemed impossible became not just possible, but provided for in ways that exceeded anything she could have imagined. Now, I want to be very clear about something. God's faithfulness isn't always packaged in miraculous interventions that solve all our problems overnight. Sometimes His strength is given to us to endure what cannot be changed. Sometimes His help comes through people who walk alongside us through the valley. Sometimes being upheld by His righteous right hand means finding peace in the storm, rather than being immediately delivered from it. But here's what never changes: His presence, His commitment, His character, His love. These remain constant whether our circumstances shift dramatically or remain challenging for seasons longer than we'd prefer. The enemy of your soul wants you to believe that God's promises are conditional, that they somehow depend on your performance or your faith level, or your ability to understand exactly how He's going to work everything out. But Isaiah 41:10 contains no conditions. There are no if-you clauses. There are no requirements you must meet first. These are declarations of what God has already determined to do in your life because of who He is, not because of who you are or what you've done. Fear not isn't a suggestion or a nice thought for when things get tough. It's a command given with the full authority of heaven, backed by the infinite resources of God Himself. And unlike human commands that often come without the power to obey them, God's commands always come with His enabling grace. Think about that for a moment. When God tells you not to fear, He simultaneously releases into your spirit the supernatural ability to live without fear. When He tells you not to be dismayed, He floods your heart with a peace that defies every logical reason you have to be worried. This isn't positive thinking or mental willpower. This is divine intervention at the level of your emotions, your thoughts, your very capacity to process reality. But I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're wondering, if God is really with me, if He's really my God, if He's really going to strengthen me and help me and uphold me, then why does life still feel so hard? Why am I still struggling? Why haven't my circumstances changed? These are honest questions, and they deserve honest answers. The presence of God in your life doesn't mean the absence of difficulty. The promise of His help doesn't guarantee that every problem will be solved according to your timeline or your preferences. But here's what it does mean. You never face anything alone. You're never without divine resources, and the outcome is never in doubt. When Jesus walked on this earth, He faced rejection, betrayal, physical exhaustion, emotional pain, and ultimately crucifixion. Yet He was never more connected to the Father, never more certain of His love, never more confident in the ultimate victory. The presence of God doesn't insulate us from human experience. It transforms how we move through human experience. Consider the 3 Hebrew young men who were thrown into the fiery furnace. God didn't prevent them from being thrown in. He didn't change Nebuchadnezzar's heart before the crisis occurred, but He was with them in the fire. So much so that the king himself declared, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." This is the pattern we see throughout Scripture. Daniel still went into the lion's den, but God shut the lions' mouths. Paul still faced shipwreck, but God preserved every life on the ship. The disciples still encountered storms, but Jesus was in the boat with them. Your situation might not change immediately, but your experience of your situation can be transformed instantly when you truly embrace the reality of God's presence with you, when you stop trying to figure out how He's going to work everything out and simply trust that He will. When you cease striving to be strong enough and instead receive His strength. When you quit attempting to help yourself and allow Him to help you. I want to share with you a practice that has revolutionized how I apply Isaiah 41:10 to my daily life. Every morning before I check my phone, before I review my schedule, before I start thinking about all the things that could go wrong that day, I speak these words out loud. God, you are with me right now. You are my God, personally committed to my well-being. You will strengthen me today. You will help me today. You will uphold me with your righteous right hand today. But I don't stop there. I then take a moment to consider what specific challenges I'm facing that day, and I speak God's promises directly into those situations. If I'm worried about a difficult conversation, I say, God, you will strengthen me for this conversation. You will help me speak with wisdom and love. You will uphold me with your righteous right hand. If I'm concerned about finances, I declare, God, you are with me in my financial situation. You are my provider, personally committed to meeting my needs. You will strengthen me to be a good steward, help me make wise decisions, and uphold me with your righteous right hand. This isn't magical thinking or trying to manipulate God into doing what I want. This is aligning my heart and mind with the truth He has already declared about His commitment to me. This is taking the promises He's given and applying them specifically to the realities I'm facing. The result has been profound. I've discovered that when I start my day anchored in the truth of God's presence and promises, circumstances that would have previously sent me into anxiety or fear lose their power to control my emotions. Problems that once seemed insurmountable begin to look like opportunities for God to demonstrate His faithfulness. Challenges that used to overwhelm me become chances to experience His strength in new ways. Now I want to address something that might be stirring in your heart as you hear this. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds wonderful, but I've prayed before. I've believed God's promises before. I've trusted Him before, and things didn't work out the way I hoped. How do I know this time will be different? Friend, I understand that question because I've asked it myself. Disappointment has a way of building walls around our hearts, making us hesitant to hope again, reluctant to trust again. But here's what I've learned through my own journey of faith. God's faithfulness isn't measured by whether He does what we expect Him to do. It's demonstrated by His consistent presence with us through whatever we face. Every time you've been disappointed, He was with you in that disappointment. Every time things didn't work out as you hoped, He was working behind the scenes in ways you couldn't see. Every time you felt like He wasn't answering your prayers, He was answering them according to wisdom and love that surpasses your understanding. The promise of Isaiah 41:10 isn't that life will be easy or that all your problems will disappear. The promise is that you will never be alone, never be without divine resources, never be beyond the reach of God's love and care. And sometimes that promise is fulfilled not by changing your circumstances, but by changing you in the midst of your circumstances. I remember meeting David, a man in his 50s who had built a successful construction business over 25 years. In a single week, he lost his biggest contract, discovered his business partner had been embezzling funds, and received notice that his wife was filing for divorce. Sitting across from me in that small coffee shop, tears streaming down his weathered face, he said, "I feel like everything I've worked for, everything I believed about my life has been stripped away. I don't even know who I am anymore." David had been raised in the church, knew all the right verses, could quote scripture with the best of them. But in that moment of complete devastation, all those familiar words felt hollow, distant, irrelevant to the crushing weight of his reality. "How do I apply fear not when I'm terrified about losing my house?" he asked. "How do I believe God is with me when it feels like He's nowhere to be found?" This is where the rubber meets the road with Isaiah 41:10. It's one thing to hear these promises when life is going well, when your health is good, when your relationships are stable, when your finances are secure. It's an entirely different thing to cling to these words when your world is falling apart, when the ground beneath your feet has shifted, when everything you thought you could count on has proven unreliable. But here's what I discovered as I sat with David that day, and what I've seen confirmed in countless lives since then. It's precisely in these moments of absolute desperation that the power of God's promises becomes most evident. Not because our circumstances suddenly improve, but because we finally stop relying on our circumstances to determine our peace. You see, most of us have built our sense of security on shifting sand. We feel safe when our bank account has a certain number in it. We feel confident when our relationships are harmonious. We feel strong when our health is good. We feel secure when our circumstances are predictable and under our control. But Isaiah 41:10 invites us to build our security on something infinitely more solid, the unchanging character of God. When God says, "Fear not," He's not speaking to your circumstances. He's speaking to your identity. He's reminding you that your security doesn't come from what's happening around you, but from what's happening within you, through His presence. He's declaring that your strength doesn't depend on your situation, but on your connection to the source of all strength. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're in a small boat on a turbulent ocean. The waves are massive, the wind is howling, the storm seems to have no end. From one perspective, you have every reason to be terrified. The elements are completely beyond your control. The situation is genuinely dangerous. Your boat feels impossibly small against the vastness of the angry sea. But now imagine that in the boat with you is someone who has complete authority over the wind and the waves, someone who can calm the storm with a word, who can walk on the water, who has never lost a single person entrusted to his care. Suddenly, the size of the waves doesn't determine your security. The strength of the wind doesn't dictate your peace. The duration of the storm doesn't control your hope. This is the reality Isaiah 41:10 reveals. You're not alone in your boat, facing the storms of life with only your own resources and abilities. The one who spoke the universe into existence is right there with you. The one who parted the Red Sea is personally committed to your well-being. The one who raised Jesus from the dead has pledged His strength, His help, and His sustaining power to your situation. But here's where many believers get stuck. We want God's presence to immediately calm every storm. We expect His help to come in the form we think is best. We assume His strength will manifest in ways that make sense to our limited understanding. And when things don't unfold according to our expectations, we begin to doubt whether His promises are really true. What we often miss is that God's ways of fulfilling His promises are as vast and varied as His character itself. Sometimes He calms the storm. Sometimes He gives you supernatural peace in the middle of the storm. Sometimes He uses the storm to develop character in you that couldn't be forged any other way. Sometimes He brings people alongside you to help weather the storm. Sometimes He provides resources you never knew existed. Sometimes He opens doors you never saw coming. The promise isn't that God will work in your life exactly as you think He should. The promise is that He will work in your life according to His perfect wisdom, His perfect love, and His perfect timing. And every way He works will ultimately prove to be better than anything you could have imagined or orchestrated yourself. Going back to David's story, what happened over the following months didn't look like what either of us might have expected. The business couldn't be saved, but David discovered skills and passions he'd buried for decades. The marriage couldn't be restored, but David found healing from wounds he'd carried since childhood. The financial losses were devastating, but David learned to find his identity in something far more valuable than his net worth. 6 months later, sitting in that same coffee shop, David looked like a different man. Not because his circumstances had returned to their previous state, but because he had discovered what it means to be upheld by the righteous right hand of God. "I wouldn't choose to go through what I went through," he told me, "but I wouldn't trade what I've learned about God's faithfulness for anything in the world." This is the paradox of Isaiah 41:10. The very experiences that seem to contradict God's promises often become the catalyst for us to discover just how true those promises really are. The situations that make us feel most abandoned by God frequently become the crucibles where His presence becomes most real to us. I want to share with you 3 practical ways you can begin to experience the reality of Isaiah 41:10 in your daily life, regardless of what you're currently facing. First, practice the discipline of present moment awareness of God's presence. Fear almost always lives in the future. Anxiety feeds on what-if scenarios that may never come to pass. But God's presence is always available right now, in this moment. Several times throughout your day, pause and simply acknowledge, God, you are with me right now. Not, you will be with me when this situation resolves, or you were with me yesterday when things were easier. Right now, in this moment, in this situation. This simple practice begins to retrain your mind to look for God's presence instead of focusing on his apparent absence. Second, learn to recognize God's help in unexpected forms. We often miss his help because it doesn't come packaged the way we thought it would. The friend who calls at exactly the right moment. The book that falls into your hands with just the words you needed to hear. The delayed flight that prevents you from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The door that closes, protecting you from a path that would have led to greater difficulty. The strength to get through one more day when you were certain you couldn't. God's help is constantly flowing into your life, but it requires eyes that are trained to see it. Start keeping a journal of the ways you notice his help each day. You'll be amazed at how active he is on your behalf when you begin paying attention. Third, replace worry with worship. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist or maintaining a false sense of positivity. It's about choosing to focus on God's character instead of your circumstances. When anxiety starts to rise, instead of rehearsing everything that could go wrong, begin declaring everything you know to be true about God. God, you are faithful, and you have never failed anyone who trusts in you. God, you are wise, and you see things I cannot see. God, you are powerful, and nothing is too difficult for you. God, you love me, and you are working all things together for my good. This practice doesn't deny the reality of your situation, but it puts your situation in the proper context of God's much greater reality. Now let me address something that might be troubling some of you as you hear these truths. You might be thinking, but what about when bad things happen to good people? What about when God's people suffer? What about when prayers aren't answered the way we hope? These are profound questions that have challenged believers for thousands of years, and I won't pretend to have easy answers to the deepest mysteries of human suffering. But I can tell you what I've observed in my own life, and in the lives of others who have walked through unimaginable darkness. The promise of Isaiah 41:10 isn't that we'll be exempt from difficulty. The promise is that we'll never walk through difficulty alone. Consider Job, who lost everything he held dear, yet declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Consider Paul, who endured shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment, and constant danger, yet wrote, "I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances." Consider Jesus himself, who cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Yet finished with, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." The presence of God doesn't insulate us from human experience. It transforms our human experience. It doesn't guarantee that life will be painless. It promises that pain will have purpose. It doesn't ensure that every story will have a happy ending from our perspective. It declares that every story is part of a much larger narrative that will ultimately end in triumph. When we truly understand this, it changes how we pray. Instead of demanding that God change our circumstances to match our preferences, we ask him to change us, to match his purposes. Instead of insisting that he prove his love by giving us what we want, we trust his love even when he gives us what we need. Instead of measuring his faithfulness by our comfort, we recognize his faithfulness in his constant presence. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. It means that your peace is no longer held hostage by your circumstances. Your joy is no longer dependent on everything going according to plan. Your security is no longer threatened by uncertainty. Your hope is no longer fragile, easily broken by disappointment. I think about Mary, the mother of Jesus, who received the most incredible promise from an angel. She would give birth to the Savior of the world. But that promise came with a cost she never could have anticipated. She would watch her son be misunderstood, rejected, betrayed, tortured, and crucified. The very child who was supposed to bring salvation became the source of her deepest sorrow. Yet at the foot of the cross Mary stood, not because she understood what was happening, but because she had learned to trust the character of the God who had called her to this impossible journey. She had experienced his faithfulness in small ways that prepared her to trust him in the ultimate test. This is the journey Isaiah 41:10 invites us on. Not a journey where everything makes sense, but a journey where we learn to trust the one who makes sense of everything. Not a path where we're always comfortable, but a path where we're always accompanied. Not an experience where we're always strong, but an experience where we're always strengthened. The enemy wants you to believe that if God's promises were really true, your life would look different than it does right now. He wants you to think that the presence of struggle means the absence of God's blessing. He wants you to conclude that if you were really walking in faith, you wouldn't face opposition. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The very fact that you're facing battles may be evidence that you're walking in territory that matters to the kingdom of God. The opposition you're encountering might be confirmation that you're moving in a direction that threatens the kingdom of darkness. The struggles you're enduring could be the labor pains of something beautiful that God is birthing in and through your life. This is why the promise begins with, "Fear not." God knows that the journey of faith will include moments that would naturally provoke fear. He knows that following Him will sometimes lead us through valleys that would ordinarily cause dismay. He knows that trusting Him will require us to walk into situations where we feel utterly dependent on His strength, His help, His sustaining power. But He also knows that these are precisely the moments when His presence becomes most precious, His character most evident, His power most real. These are the experiences that transform us from people who know about God to people who know God intimately, personally, powerfully. So let me ask you something that might challenge everything you think you know about God's timing. Why do you suppose God chose to give this promise through the prophet Isaiah during one of Israel's darkest hours? Why didn't He wait until they were already experiencing victory to remind? Why speak these words when them of His faithfulness? They were facing exile when their enemies seemed overwhelming, when their future looked impossible. Because that's exactly when we need to hear them most. That's when these words have the power to transform not just our circumstances, but our very understanding of who God is and how He works in our lives. You see, there's something profound that happens when we encounter God's promises in the wilderness, something that can't happen when life is smooth and predictable. In the comfortable seasons, we can easily fool ourselves into thinking we're strong enough, smart enough, capable enough to handle whatever comes our way. We can mistake our temporary stability for permanent security. But in the wilderness moments, all pretense falls away. All our carefully constructed safety nets prove inadequate. All our backup plans reveal their limitations. And suddenly, we find ourselves face to face with a choice that will define not just how we handle this particular crisis, but how we'll walk with God for the rest of our lives. The choice is this: will we allow our circumstances to define our understanding of God, or will we allow our understanding of God to define how we see our circumstances? Most people, if we're honest, choose the first option. When things go well, God is good. When things go badly, God is distant, uncaring, or perhaps even cruel. When prayers are answered according to our timeline, God is faithful. When prayers seem to go unanswered, we question His love. But Isaiah 41:10 invites us into a completely different way of thinking. It calls us to anchor our understanding of reality not in the shifting sands of circumstance, but in the bedrock of God's unchanging character. It challenges us to interpret our experiences through the lens of His promises, rather than interpreting His promises through the lens of our experiences. This isn't easy. In fact, it goes against every natural human instinct. Our minds are wired to make sense of the world through pattern recognition, through cause and effect, through what we can observe and measure. But faith calls us to a different kind of knowing, a deeper kind of understanding that transcends what our physical senses can perceive. Let me tell you about Rachel, a young woman who taught me more about the power of Isaiah 41:10 than any theologian ever could. Rachel was 28 years old when she received a diagnosis that shattered her world. Advanced cancer, aggressive, with a prognosis that gave her months, not years. I'll never forget sitting with her in that sterile hospital room as she processed the news, the machines beeping around her, the smell of antiseptic in the air, the weight of impossible questions hanging between us. "Where is God in this?" she asked, not with anger but with genuine confusion. "I've served Him faithfully, I've tried to live right. I've prayed for others, supported missions, loved people well. How does this fit with His promises?" These are the moments when everything we think we believe gets tested, when the rubber meets the road of real life, and we discover whether our faith is built on sand or on solid rock. Rachel could have easily concluded that God's promises were empty, that His presence was a comforting myth, that His love was conditional based on circumstances. Instead, she made a decision that I still find breathtaking. She decided to take God at His word, regardless of how things looked. She began each day by speaking Isaiah 41:10 over her situation, not as a magical incantation, but as an act of radical trust. Fear not, for you are with me. Be not dismayed, for you are my God. You will strengthen me, yes, you will help me, you will uphold me with your righteous right hand. Now I need to tell you that Rachel's story didn't end with miraculous physical healing. She fought courageously for 18 months before she went home to be with the Lord. But something extraordinary happened in those 18 months that defied every medical prediction and touched everyone who knew her. Instead of the fear and despair that typically accompanies such a diagnosis, Rachel radiated a peace that seemed almost supernatural. Instead of bitterness about her circumstances, she displayed a joy that drew people from all walks of life to her bedside. Instead of focusing on what was being taken from her, she became laser-focused on what she could give to others. Her hospital room became a sanctuary where nurses, doctors, other patients, and visitors encountered something they couldn't explain but desperately wanted. They met a woman who was literally being held up by the righteous right hand of God, who was experiencing His strength in the midst of physical weakness, who was receiving His help in ways that transcended medical intervention. Rachel taught me that God's promises aren't about manipulating our circumstances to match our preferences. They're about experiencing His presence so deeply that our circumstances lose their power to determine our peace. She showed me that being strengthened by God doesn't always mean being physically healed, but it always means being spiritually sustained in ways that defy human understanding. I don't understand why this is happening to me, she told me one afternoon, her voice weak but her spirit strong. But I've discovered something incredible. God's presence is so real in this room, so tangible, so powerful, that I wouldn't trade this experience of knowing Him for anything in the world. Even this. That's the mystery and the power of Isaiah 41:10. It's not a guarantee that life will unfold according to our plans, but it's an absolute assurance that we'll never face anything outside of God's presence, His power, and His love. It's not a promise that we'll always understand what He's doing, but it's a declaration that He's always doing something meaningful, even when we can't see it. But let me bring this back to where you are right now, because I don't want you to think that experiencing God's faithfulness requires facing life-threatening illness or catastrophic loss. The truth is, Isaiah 41:10 is just as relevant to your Monday morning anxiety as it is to your midnight crisis. It's just as powerful when you're worried about paying bills as when you're facing major surgery. The God who promises to be with you doesn't distinguish between big fears and small fears, major concerns and minor worries. To Him, anything that threatens your peace is worthy of His attention. Anything that causes you to feel dismayed is something He wants to address. Any area where you need strength, help, or support is a place where His righteous right hand is ready to uphold you. Think about your typical week. Monday morning, you wake up already feeling behind. The weekend wasn't long enough to recharge, the week ahead looks overwhelming, and you haven't even had your first cup of coffee yet. Tuesday, you get an unexpected bill that throws your carefully planned budget into chaos. Wednesday, a relationship that's been strained finally reaches a breaking point. Thursday, your boss makes a comment that leaves you questioning your job security. Friday, you're so exhausted you can barely think straight. Sound familiar? This is real life for most of us. Not dramatic, crisis-level emergencies, but the steady drip of daily pressures that can slowly erode our peace if we let them. And here's what's beautiful about Isaiah 41:10. It's not just for the mountaintop moments or the valley experiences. It's for the ordinary Tuesday when everything feels harder than it should be. Fear not applies to your worry about that presentation you have to give next week. I am with you is true when you're sitting in traffic, running late, feeling frustrated. I will strengthen you is available when you're having the same argument with your teenager for the 10th time this month. I will help you is real when you're staring at bills you're not sure how to pay. I will uphold you is active when you feel like you're barely keeping your head above water. The enemy wants you to believe that God is only interested in the big, dramatic moments of your life. He wants you to think that your daily struggles are too small, too ordinary, too insignificant for divine intervention. But the God who numbers the hairs on your head, who knows when a sparrow falls, who collects your tears in a bottle, is intimately concerned with every detail of your existence. This is where many believers miss out on experiencing the fullness of God's promises. We save them for emergencies, like a fire extinguisher behind glass, that we break only when everything is burning down. We treat His presence like a special occasion blessing, rather than a constant reality. We approach his strength like a limited resource that we shouldn't use up on small things. But Isaiah 41:10 reveals a God of unlimited resources, infinite availability, and constant accessibility. His presence isn't rationed, his strength doesn't run out, his help isn't reserved for certain types of problems. His sustaining power isn't only activated during major crises. Every morning when you open your eyes, he is with you. Every decision you face throughout the day, he is your God, personally invested in your well-being. Every moment when you feel inadequate for what's required of you, he will strengthen you. Every situation where you don't know what to do next, he will help you. Every time you feel like you're about to fall apart, he will uphold you with his righteous right hand. But here's what I've discovered. Knowing this intellectually and experiencing it personally are two very different things. Many believers can quote Isaiah 41:10 from memory, but still live as though they're facing life's challenges alone. They can explain what the verse means, but struggle to access its power when they need it most. The difference between knowing about God's promises and living in the reality of them comes down to one word: practice. Just like physical muscles grow stronger through regular exercise, our faith muscles grow stronger through regular practice. Just like we develop skill in any area through repetition and application, we learn to walk in the reality of God's promises through daily, intentional engagement with them. This is why I want to give you some very practical tools for making Isaiah 41:10 not just a beautiful verse you admire, but a living reality you experience. These aren't complicated theological concepts or mystical spiritual disciplines. They're simple, accessible practices that anyone can begin implementing immediately. First, I want you to personalize this promise. Instead of reading it as a general statement about God's character, receive it as a specific message to you. Write it out in your own handwriting, but insert your name. Your name, fear not, for I am with you. Your name, be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, your name, yes, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. There's something powerful that happens when you see your own name connected to God's promises. It transforms abstract truth into personal reality. It moves the promise from the realm of general theology into the specific circumstances of your individual life. Second, create specific applications for your current situations. Don't just read the verse and hope it somehow applies to your life. Take the specific challenges you're facing right now and speak God's promises directly into them. If you're worried about your marriage, say, God, you are with me in my marriage. You are my God, committed to the well-being of my relationship. You will strengthen me to love well, help me communicate clearly, and uphold my marriage with your righteous right hand. If you're anxious about your finances, declare, God, you are with me in my financial situation. You are my provider, personally invested in meeting my needs. You will strengthen me to make wise decisions, help me find creative solutions, and uphold my financial well-being with your righteous right hand. If you're struggling with a health issue, proclaim, God, you are with me in this health challenge. You are my healer, intimately concerned with my physical well-being. You will strengthen me to fight this battle, help me access the resources I need, and uphold me with your righteous right hand. Third, develop the discipline of real-time application. Don't wait until you have time for extended prayer or Bible study to access God's promises. Learn to apply Isaiah 41:10 in the moment when fear strikes, when anxiety rises, when you feel overwhelmed. Standing in line at the grocery store, worried about how you're going to pay for groceries, whisper, fear not, God is with me right now. Sitting in the doctor's waiting room, anxious about test results, remind yourself, be not dismayed, God is my God, and he will strengthen me for whatever I'm about to hear. Lying in bed at 3 a.m., mind racing with concerns about tomorrow, speak into the darkness, God will help me, God will uphold me with his righteous right hand. These aren't magic formulas or attempts to manipulate God into doing what we want. They're acts of faith that align our hearts with truth in moments when lies feel more convincing than reality. They're ways of training our minds to default to God's promises instead of to our fears. Fourth, learn to recognize and celebrate God's faithfulness in small ways. We often miss his presence because we're looking for dramatic interventions while he's working through ordinary means. The friend who calls just when you need encouragement, the unexpected check in the mail, the parking spot that opens up exactly when you need it. the burst of energy when you thought you had nothing left, the idea that comes to mind at just the right moment. Start keeping track of these seemingly small evidences of God's care. Write them down, tell others about them, thank Him for them. What you'll discover is that God's faithfulness is much more active in your life than you ever realized. You'll begin to see His hand in places you previously attributed to coincidence or luck. This practice of recognition and gratitude creates a positive cycle in your spiritual life. The more you notice God's faithfulness, the easier it becomes to trust Him in new situations. The more you celebrate His past interventions, the more confident you become about His future provision. The more you acknowledge His presence in ordinary moments, the more natural it feels to lean on Him during extraordinary challenges. But I want to address something that might be creating resistance in your heart as you hear these truths. Maybe you're thinking, I've tried believing God's promises before, and I was disappointed. I've prayed these verses over my situations, and things didn't work out the way I hoped. How do I know this time will be different? This is an honest struggle that many believers face, and it deserves a thoughtful response. Disappointment with God is real, and it can create walls around our hearts that make it difficult to trust again. But I want to suggest that perhaps our disappointment sometimes comes from misunderstanding what God's promises actually guarantee. Isaiah 41:10 doesn't promise that your circumstances will always align with your preferences. It doesn't guarantee that every prayer will be answered according to your timeline or your specifications. It doesn't ensure that following God will make your life easier or more comfortable. What it does promise is that you will never be alone, never be without divine resources, never be beyond the reach of God's love and care. It guarantees His presence in every situation, His strength for every challenge, His help in every need, His sustaining power in every weakness. Sometimes God's faithfulness looks like changing our circumstances. Sometimes it looks like changing us in the midst of our circumstances. Sometimes His help comes through miraculous intervention. Sometimes His strength is manif, comes through natural means, ested in physical healing. Sometimes it's demonstrated through the ability to endure with grace. The key is learning to recognize and receive God's faithfulness however it comes, rather than demanding that it come in the specific form we think is best. This requires a level of trust that goes beyond our ability to understand or control outcomes. It calls us to rest in His character, rather than in our ability to predict His methods. I think about Peter, walking on water toward Jesus. As long as his eyes were fixed on his Lord, the impossible became possible. But the moment he focused on the wind and waves, the moment he allowed his circumstances to define his reality, rather than allowing Jesus' presence to define his possibilities, he began to sink. The same dynamic is at work in our experience of Isaiah 41:10. As long as our focus remains on God's character, His promises, His presence, we find ourselves walking in supernatural peace and strength, even in the midst of turbulent circumstances. But when we shift our gaze to the size of our problems, the complexity of our situations, the uncertainty of our futures, we begin to sink into fear, anxiety, and despair. This is why the promise begins with redirecting our focus. Fear not. Don't let your emotions be controlled by what you see happening around you. Be not dismayed. Don't allow your peace to be determined by circumstances beyond your control. Instead, fix your attention on the unchanging reality of God's presence, His commitment, His character. But how do we practically maintain this focus when everything in our environment is screaming for our attention? How do we keep our eyes on Jesus when the winds are howling and the waves are crashing? How do we experience the reality of God's presence when His presence doesn't feel particularly real? This is where the spiritual discipline of meditation becomes crucial. Not the empty your mind meditation of Eastern religions, but the biblical practice of filling your mind with God's truth until it becomes more real to you than anything your physical senses are telling you. Take Isaiah 41:10 and turn it over in your mind like a precious jewel, examining it from every angle. Fear not. What would your life look like if you truly lived without fear? Not the absence of challenging circumstances, but the presence of unshakable peace in the midst of any circumstance. For I am with you. What does it mean that the Creator of the universe has chosen to be personally present in your situation right now? Be not dismayed, for I am your God. How does knowing that the Almighty has personally committed Himself to your Well-being change how you view your current challenges. I will strengthen you. What would you attempt? What risks would you take? What steps of obedience would you make if you truly believed that divine strength was available to you? Yes, I will help you. How does the promise of God's active assistance change your approach to the problems you're facing? I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. What does it mean to be sustained by the power and authority of the one who holds all things together? This kind of meditation isn't passive reflection, it's active engagement with truth. It's allowing God's promises to reshape your understanding of reality. It's training your mind to default to His perspective rather than to fear-based assumptions about what might happen. The more you practice this kind of focused meditation on God's character and promises, the more natural it becomes to access His peace in stressful moments. The more familiar you become with His voice through His word, the easier it is to hear His whispers of comfort when anxiety tries to take over. The more deeply you internalize His love, the less power external circumstances have to shake your sense of security. This is the journey that Isaiah 41:10 invites us on. Not a journey where we never face difficulty, but a journey where difficulty never defines us. Not a path where we're never weak, but a path where we discover that His strength is made perfect in our weakness. Not an experience where we never feel afraid, but an experience where we learn to choose faith over fear, trust over anxiety, hope over despair. And here's what I've discovered through years of walking this journey myself and walking alongside others who are learning to live in the reality of God's promises. The more we practice this way of thinking, the more our external circumstances begin to align with our internal peace. Not because we've learned to manipulate God, but because we've learned to position ourselves to receive His goodness however He chooses to express it. When we're no longer driven by fear, we make better decisions. When we're no longer controlled by anxiety, we can think more clearly. When we're no longer overwhelmed by circumstances, we can see opportunities we previously missed. When we're walking in the confidence of God's presence and promises, we naturally begin to live in ways that invite His blessing and favor. This isn't prosperity theology or name it and claim it thinking. This is simply the natural result of aligning our hearts and minds with the way God designed the universe to work. When we live in harmony with His character and His ways, we position ourselves to experience more of His goodness, not because we've earned it, but because we've removed the barriers that previously prevented us from receiving it. But I want to take you deeper into this truth, because there's something about Isaiah 41:10 that most people miss entirely, something that transforms this from being just another encouraging Bible verse into becoming a life-altering encounter with the living God. You see, when God says, "Fear not," He's not just giving you a suggestion for positive thinking. He's actually issuing a divine command backed by the full authority of heaven. And unlike human commands that often come without the power to obey them, every command from God comes with the supernatural ability to fulfill it. Think about that for a moment. When Jesus said to the paralyzed man, "Rise, take up your bed and walk," those words didn't just contain instruction, they contained the power to make walking possible. When He spoke to the raging storm, "Peace, be still," His words didn't just express a desire, they carried the authority to calm the winds and waves. In the same way, when God speaks "fear not" over your situation, He's not just telling you what you should do, He's releasing into your spirit the supernatural capacity to live without fear. He's imparting divine courage into your human weakness. He's downloading heavenly peace into your earthly anxiety. This is why some people can face the most terrifying circumstances with unexplainable calm, while others are paralyzed by relatively minor concerns. It's not about personality types or natural temperament. It's about whether we've learned to receive and activate the divine command that says, "Fear not." Let me tell you about Maria, a woman I met who taught me more about this principle than any seminary class ever could. Maria was an immigrant who had come to this country with nothing but hope and determination. She worked 3 jobs to support her family, sending money back home to care for aging parents while trying to build a future for her children here. When the factory where she worked her main job suddenly closed, Maria faced a crisis that would have sent most people into panic. She had no college education, spoke English as a second language, and was competing for jobs with people half her age. Every logical assessment of her situation suggested she should be terrified about her family's future. But Maria had something that defied logic. She had learned to live in the reality of Isaiah 41:10. not just as a concept she believed, but as a power she accessed daily. Instead of spending her days consumed with worry about what might happen, she spent her mornings declaring God's promises over her situation. Dios mío, she would pray in her native Spanish, you said, fear not, so I choose not to fear today. You said you are with me, so I know I'm not facing this alone. You said you will strengthen me, so I receive your strength for this job search. You said you will help me, so I expect your help to show up in ways I cannot imagine. You said you will uphold me, so I trust that you will not let me fall. What happened over the following weeks defied every statistical prediction about unemployed workers in her demographic. Doors opened that had no business opening. Opportunities appeared that made no logical sense. People went out of their way to help her in ways that couldn't be explained by normal human kindness. Within 6 weeks, Maria not only had a new job, she had a better job than the one she'd lost, with better pay, better benefits, and better opportunities for advancement. When I asked her how she explained what had happened, her answer was simple. When God says He will help you, He means it. But you have to believe it enough to receive it. This is the secret that most believers never discover. God's promises aren't just comforting words to read when we're struggling. They're spiritual realities that become activated when we align our hearts with their truth. They're not just descriptions of what God might do someday. They're declarations of what He's ready to do right now for anyone who will receive them. But here's where it gets even more profound. Notice the progression in Isaiah 41:10. It doesn't just say, I will strengthen you and leave it at that. It says, I will strengthen you, yes, I will help you, I will uphold you. 3 distinct promises, each building on the last, each more comprehensive than what came before. First, He strengthens you. This is internal fortification, divine energy flowing into human weakness, supernatural endurance being imparted to your spirit, your mind, your emotions, even your physical body. When you feel like you can't take another step, His strength carries you forward. When you feel like you can't handle one more pressure, His strength expands your capacity. But He doesn't stop with just making you stronger, He also helps you. This is external assistance, divine intervention in your circumstances, supernatural orchestration of events, people, resources, and opportunities. When you don't know what to do next, His help provides clarity. When you don't have what you need, His help supplies resources. When obstacles seem insurmountable, His help creates pathways. And finally, He upholds you. This is comprehensive support, divine maintenance of your entire being, supernatural sustaining power that keeps you stable when everything around you is shaking. When the ground beneath your feet feels unsteady, His upholding keeps you secure. When life's pressures threaten to crush you, His upholding maintains your integrity. Do you see the beautiful progression here? Internal strengthening, external assistance, and comprehensive support. God doesn't just help you cope with your challenges. He transforms your capacity to face them, actively intervenes in your circumstances, and maintains your stability throughout the entire process. This is what David understood when he wrote Psalm 23. He didn't just say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He painted a picture of comprehensive divine care. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness. And even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. David had learned to recognize and receive God's care in every dimension of his existence. Physical provision, green pastures for nourishment and rest. Emotional restoration, still waters that brought peace to his troubled soul. Spiritual guidance, paths of righteousness that aligned with God's purposes. And ultimate security, the confidence that even in life's darkest moments, God's presence transformed everything. This is the kind of comprehensive life that Isaiah 41:10 makes available to every believer. Not just occasional divine intervention in crisis moments, but daily, ongoing, multidimensional care that touches every aspect of your existence. But I've noticed something interesting in my years of ministry. Most Christians are much more comfortable with the idea of God helping them occasionally than they are with the reality of God wanting to be intimately involved in the details of their daily lives. We'll pray for big things: healing from serious illness, provision for major needs, protection from significant dangers. But we hesitate to involve God in smaller concerns, the daily stresses, the minor disappointments, the ordinary challenges that make up the majority of our experience. Yet Isaiah 41:10 makes no distinction between big problems and small problems, major fears and minor anxieties, significant challenges and everyday concerns. The promise is comprehensive. Fear not about anything. I am with you in everything. I will strengthen you for whatever you're facing. I will help you with whatever you need. I will uphold you through whatever comes your way. This means that the same God who promises to be with you during life's major crises also wants to be with you during Monday morning traffic. The same divine strength that's available for life-threatening emergencies is also available for challenging conversations with difficult people. The same supernatural help that can part Red Seas can also help you navigate complex family dynamics or workplace politics. The same upholding power that sustained the martyrs can also sustain you through seasons of loneliness, disappointment, or confusion. God's care isn't rationed based on the magnitude of your problems. His presence isn't reserved for your most dramatic moments. His promises aren't only activated during your darkest hours. Every moment of every day, you have access to the full reality of Isaiah 41:10. Every decision you can make from the confidence that God is with you. Every challenge you can face with the assurance that divine strength is available. Every need you encounter, you can approach with the expectation that supernatural help is ready to manifest. But accessing this reality requires what I call practical faith, not just believing that God's promises are true in theory, but learning to apply them specifically to the actual circumstances you're facing right now. Not just acknowledging that God is powerful in general, but expecting His power to show up in the particular situations that are causing you concern today. Let me give you a framework for practicing this kind of applied faith with Isaiah 41:10. I call it the Fear Not Protocol, and it's designed to help you move from intellectual knowledge of God's promises to experiential reality of His presence and power. When fear, anxiety, or discouragement begins to rise in your heart, instead of allowing those emotions to spiral into worry or panic, immediately activate the Fear Not Protocol. Step 1. Acknowledge God's presence. Out loud, if possible, declare, God, you are with me right now in this situation. I'm not facing this alone. This isn't positive thinking or psychological manipulation. This is aligning your heart with spiritual reality. God is present whether you acknowledge it or not, but acknowledging His presence positions you to receive the comfort and strength that His presence provides. Step 2. Receive His strength. Specifically ask for and receive divine strengthening for whatever you're facing. God, I receive your strength right now for this challenge. I don't have to handle this in my own power. Your strength is available to me, and I choose to draw on it rather than trying to be strong enough on my own. Step 3. Expect His help. Move from hoping that God might assist you to expecting that He will help you. God, I expect your help to show up in this situation. I don't know exactly how you'll help, but I trust that you will. I'm watching for your assistance, and I'm open to receiving it however you choose to provide it. Step 4. Rest in His upholding. Release the need to control outcomes and trust that God will sustain you regardless of how things unfold. God, I rest in your promise to uphold me. Even if this situation doesn't resolve the way I hope, I trust that you will maintain my peace, preserve my hope, and keep me stable through whatever comes. This protocol isn't a magic formula that guarantees specific outcomes. It's a practical way of positioning your heart to receive the spiritual realities that God has already made available through His promises. It's training yourself to respond to challenging circumstances with faith rather than fear, trust rather than anxiety, hope rather than despair. I've watched hundreds of people implement this simple practice, and the results have been consistently remarkable. Not because the protocol itself has power, but because it creates space for God's power to operate in and through human hearts that are aligned with His truth. But let me address something that might be troubling you as you consider implementing this kind of practical faith. You might be thinking, this sounds like I'm supposed to pretend everything is fine when it's not, or act like problems don't exist when they clearly do. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Biblical faith doesn't deny reality. It interprets reality through the lens of God's greater reality. It doesn't pretend problems don't exist. It recognizes that God is bigger than any problem. It doesn't minimize legitimate concerns. It places those concerns in the context of unlimited divine resources. When you practice the fear not protocol, you're not denying that you're facing difficulties. You're acknowledging that you're facing difficulties with divine assistance. You're not pretending you're not afraid. You're choosing to act on God's promises despite feeling afraid. You're not claiming that challenging situations are easy. You're accessing supernatural strength to handle challenging situations with grace. This distinction is crucial because the enemy often tries to convince believers that walking in faith means being dishonest about their struggles. He wants you to think that trusting God requires pretending you're not human, that receiving His promises means denying your emotions, that experiencing His peace means never acknowledging difficulty. But look at how Jesus Himself handled stress and pressure. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the most difficult moment of His earthly ministry, He didn't pretend He wasn't troubled. He told His disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He prayed so intensely that His sweat became like drops of blood. Yet in the midst of that honest acknowledgement of His human struggle, Jesus also demonstrated perfect trust in His Father's character and purposes. "Not my will, but yours be done." He felt the full weight of what He was facing, but He chose to align His heart with divine purposes rather than being controlled by human emotions. This is the kind of authentic faith that Isaiah 41:10 makes possible. Faith that doesn't deny the reality of difficulty, but refuses to be defined by it. Faith that acknowledges the presence of problems, but maintains confidence in the presence of God. Faith that feels the pressure of challenging circumstances, but draws strength from unlimited divine resources. When you begin to practice this kind of faith consistently, something profound begins to happen in your spiritual life. You discover that God's promises aren't just comforting thoughts for desperate moments. They're the foundation for a completely different way of living. A way of living that's characterized not by the absence of challenges, but by the presence of supernatural resources to meet every challenge. You begin to approach difficult conversations not with dread, but with the confidence that God will give you wisdom and grace for whatever needs to be said. You face uncertain situations not with panic, but with peace that comes from knowing God is orchestrating events behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. You handle disappointments not with despair, but with hope that comes from understanding that God's plans for you are always good, even when His methods are mysterious. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen automatically. Like any skill, it requires practice, repetition, and intentional development. But the more you exercise your faith in God's promises, the stronger your faith becomes. The more you choose to trust His character over your circumstances, the easier it becomes to maintain peace in turbulent situations. And here's what I've discovered that might surprise you. As your internal reality becomes increasingly anchored in God's promises, your external circumstances often begin to shift as well. Not because you've learned to manipulate God into giving you what you want, but because you've learned to position yourself to receive what He's always wanted to give you. When you're no longer controlled by fear, you make decisions from a place of wisdom rather than desperation. When you're no longer driven by anxiety, you can see opportunities that panic would have blinded you to. When you're walking in the confidence of God's presence and provision, you naturally begin to live in ways that invite His favor and blessing. People are drawn to individuals who carry genuine peace in stressful situations. Employers value employees who remain calm under pressure. Friends and family members are attracted to those who respond to difficulties with grace rather than panic. This isn't about using faith as a strategy for success. It's about discovering that walking in alignment with God's promises naturally produces fruit in every area of life. But the most significant transformation isn't in your external circumstances. It's in your internal experience of life itself. When Isaiah 41:10 becomes a living reality rather than just a beautiful verse, you discover what it means to live with unshakable security. Not because your life becomes problem-free, but because your problems lose their power to determine your peace. You begin to understand what Jesus meant when He said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." The trouble is still real, but it's no longer the dominant factor in your experience. The obstacles are still present, but they're no longer obstacles to your joy. The challenges still exist, but they're no longer challenges to your confidence in God's goodness. This is the life that God intended for every one of His children. Not a life free from difficulty, but a life that remains unshaken in the midst of any difficulty. Not an existence without problems, but an experience where problems become opportunities to witness God's faithfulness. Not a journey without valleys, but a journey where even the valleys are transformed by the presence of the Good Shepherd who walks beside us. And the beautiful thing is that this transformation becomes a testimony to everyone around you. When people see you handling pressure with peace, responding to setbacks with hope, facing uncertainty with confidence, they want to know what you know. They want to understand what makes you different. They want to discover the source of your stability. This gives you the opportunity to share not just the words of Isaiah 41:10, but the reality of what it means to live under the protection and provision of the God who keeps his promises. You become a living demonstration of divine faithfulness, a walking testimony to the power of God's presence in human experience. Your life becomes a beacon of hope to others who are struggling with fear, anxiety, and discouragement. Without preaching at anyone or trying to convince anyone of anything, your very existence declares that there is another way to live, another source of strength, another foundation for security. This is why the enemy works so hard to keep believers living in fear rather than walking in faith. He knows that nothing threatens his kingdom more than Christians who actually believe and live according to God's promises. He understands that nothing draws people to the gospel like witnessing the reality of God's power in the lives of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with supernatural grace. When you begin to live in the fullness of Isaiah 41:10, you become dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. Not because you're trying to be dramatic or powerful, but because you're demonstrating that God's promises are real, his presence is available, and his power is accessible to anyone who will receive it. This is the journey that begins with a simple choice. Will you take God at his word? Will you choose to believe that his promises are as true today as they were when they were first spoken? Will you dare to live as though the creator of the universe has personally committed himself to your well-being? The invitation is extended. The promises are available. The power is accessible. All that remains is your response. Will you continue to live as though you're facing life's challenges alone, or will you step into the reality of divine partnership? Will you keep trying to be strong enough in your own power, or will you learn to draw on unlimited heavenly resources? The choice is yours. But the outcome is certain. When you align your heart with the truth of Isaiah 41:10, when you learn to live in the reality of God's presence and promises, when you discover what it means to be strengthened, helped, and upheld by the righteous right hand of the Almighty, your life will never be the same. And neither will the lives of those who witness the transformation that occurs when ordinary people discover they serve an extraordinary God who keeps his promises, honors his commitments, and never abandons his children. Fear not. These two simple words carry within them the power to transform every anxious thought, every sleepless night, every moment when uncertainty threatens to overwhelm your peace. But I want to show you something that most people miss when they read this promise, something that changes everything about how we understand what God is really offering us. You see, when God says, "Fear not," he's not just giving you good advice or positive encouragement. He's making a declaration about reality itself. He's telling you something fundamental about the nature of your situation that your physical eyes cannot see, that your human reasoning cannot grasp, that your past experiences cannot confirm. He's revealing that regardless of what appears to be happening in your circumstances, regardless of how overwhelming your challenges seem, regardless of how alone you feel, there is a spiritual reality operating that is more powerful than anything you can observe with your natural senses. Let me paint a picture for you that might help you understand this more clearly. Imagine you're in a room that appears to be completely dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. You feel isolated, confused, maybe even panicked by the darkness surrounding you. But what if I told you that there's actually a light switch right next to you, and all you have to do is reach out and flip it? The light was available the entire time. The power was present. The solution was within reach. But until someone told you where to find the switch, you remained in darkness not because light wasn't available, but because you didn't know how to access it. This is exactly what's happening in Isaiah 41:10. God is telling you where the light switch is located in your spiritual life. He's showing you how to access resources that have always been available, but perhaps remained hidden from your understanding. When he says, "Fear not," he's not asking you to work up enough courage to stop being afraid. He's informing you that fear is actually an inappropriate response to your situation because you have access to divine resources that completely change the equation. It's like being afraid of drowning while standing in a swimming pool that's only 3 feet deep. The fear feels real, the panic seems justified, but the fear is based on incomplete information about your actual situation. When you realize you can simply stand up and walk to safety, everything changes. This is why understanding the context of Isaiah 41 is so crucial. These words weren't spoken to people who were living comfortable, easy lives. They were given to a nation facing exile, displacement, and seemingly impossible circumstances. They were addressed to individuals who had every human reason to be terrified about their future. Yet in the midst of their darkest hour, God spoke these words, "Fear not." Not because their circumstances weren't challenging, but because their circumstances weren't the determining factor in their ultimate security. Think about that for a moment. The same God who spoke the universe into existence, who commands the forces of nature, who holds the hearts of kings in his hand, was personally addressing their situation. The same divine power that created galaxies was being applied to their individual needs. When you begin to grasp the magnitude of who is making these promises to you, it changes everything about how you view your current challenges. The God who never slumbers nor sleeps is watching over your situation. The God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills is concerned about your provision. The God who knows the end from the beginning is orchestrating events in your life with perfect wisdom and timing. But here's where many believers get stuck. We know these truths intellectually, but we struggle to experience them emotionally. We can quote the verses, but we still wake up at 3 in the morning with our hearts racing from worry. We understand the theology, but we still feel overwhelmed by circumstances that seem beyond our control. The gap between knowing and experiencing God's promises is bridged through what I call active faith. Not passive hoping that things will work out, but active engagement with the spiritual resources God has made available to you. Let me tell you about James, a man who taught me more about this principle than any theological book ever could. James was a successful businessman who built his company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He employed dozens of people, supported numerous charities, and seemed to have everything under control. But when the economic downturn hit his industry particularly hard, James watched his life's work crumble in a matter of months. Contracts were cancelled, employees had to be laid off, and personal bankruptcy became not just a possibility, but an inevitability. At 55 years old, he found himself facing the loss of everything he had spent decades building. The night before he was supposed to sign the final bankruptcy papers, James sat in his empty office, surrounded by boxes of memories from better times. He told me later that he had never felt more afraid in his entire life, not just afraid of financial ruin, but afraid of facing his wife, his children, his community as a man who had failed. In that moment of complete desperation, James did something he hadn't done in years. He got down on his knees and cried out to God with the kind of raw honesty that comes only from having nowhere else to turn. And as he prayed, Isaiah 41:10 came to his mind with such clarity and power that he said it felt like God was speaking directly into the room. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." But James didn't just hear these words as comfort for his emotions. He received them as a divine strategy for his situation. Instead of signing the bankruptcy papers the next morning, he called his lawyer and asked for more time. Instead of accepting defeat, he began to actively look for God's help to manifest in practical ways. What happened over the following weeks defied every business expert's predictions. A former client called with an unexpected opportunity. A competitor offered to partner on a project that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. A bank that had previously refused to work with him suddenly found creative solutions for restructuring his debt. None of these developments made sense from a purely business perspective. James's credit was destroyed, his assets were depleted, his reputation was damaged. Yet doors kept opening that had no logical reason to open. When I asked James how he explained what had happened, his answer revealed something profound about how God's promises actually work in real life. "I stopped trying to figure out how God was going to help me," he said, "and I started looking for how he was already helping me." That shift in perspective made all the difference. Instead of focusing on what was wrong with his situation, James began to focus on what God was doing in his situation. Instead of being paralyzed by fear about what might happen, he became actively engaged in cooperating with what was happening. This is the key to experiencing the reality of Isaiah 41:10 in your own life. God's help is often already present, but it's operating in ways that are easy to miss if you're not looking for it. His strength is available, but it might be manifesting differently than you expected. His presence is constant, but you might not recognize it if you're looking for dramatic signs rather than subtle guidance. The promise, "I will help you," doesn't always mean that God will solve your problems in the way you think they should be solved. Sometimes his help comes in the form of wisdom to navigate complex situations. Sometimes it appears as people who show up at exactly the right moment with exactly what you need. Sometimes it manifests as opportunities that arise from what initially looked like setbacks. The promise, "I will strengthen you," doesn't always mean that you'll feel physically or emotionally powerful. Sometimes his strength is demonstrated through your ability to remain peaceful in chaotic circumstances. Sometimes it's revealed in your capacity to make wise decisions under pressure. Sometimes it's shown through your endurance when everything in you wants to quit. The promise, "I will uphold you," doesn't always mean that you won't experience difficulty or even failure. Sometimes his upholding is demonstrated through your ability to maintain hope when circumstances would normally produce despair. Sometimes it's evidenced by your capacity to bounce back from setbacks that would crush others. Sometimes it's revealed in your ability to grow stronger through experiences that were designed to break you. But here's what never changes: his presence, his commitment, his character, his love. These remain constant regardless of how his help, strength, and upholding choose to manifest in your particular situation. This brings us to a crucial understanding that transforms how we apply Isaiah 41:10 to our lives. God's promises aren't formulas that guarantee specific outcomes. They're declarations of his character that guarantee his involvement in our outcomes. When you really understand this distinction, it changes everything about how you pray, how you plan, how you respond to setbacks, and how you navigate uncertainty. You stop trying to control how God fulfills his promises and start positioning yourself to receive his faithfulness however it chooses to manifest. I want to give you 3 practical ways to position yourself to experience the fullness of Isaiah 41:10, regardless of what you're currently facing. First, practice the discipline of divine perspective. This means learning to interpret your circumstances through the lens of God's promises, rather than interpreting God's promises through the lens of your circumstances. When something challenging happens, instead of immediately asking, "Where is God in this?" start by declaring, "God is with me in this, even if I can't see how yet." This isn't denial of reality or positive thinking. This is training yourself to remember spiritual truth when physical evidence seems to contradict it. It's choosing to believe that God's perspective on your situation is more accurate than your own, even when his perspective isn't immediately obvious. Second, develop the habit of expectant cooperation. This means actively looking for ways that God might be working in your situation and positioning yourself to cooperate with his activity. Instead of passively waiting for him to solve your problems, start actively watching for his solutions to emerge. Pay attention to unexpected opportunities, unusual conversations, surprising connections, and seemingly coincidental events. God's help often comes through natural means, but that doesn't make it less supernatural. His strength frequently operates through ordinary circumstances, but that doesn't make it less divine. Third, cultivate the practice of grateful recognition. This means consistently acknowledging and celebrating the ways God's faithfulness shows up in your life, even when those ways are small or subtle. The more you train yourself to recognize his involvement in ordinary moments, the easier it becomes to trust his involvement in extraordinary challenges. Keep a record of answered prayers, unexpected provisions, divine appointments, and moments when you experienced peace that didn't make logical sense. This isn't about manufacturing gratitude for things that aren't really blessings. This is about developing eyes to see the ways God is constantly active on your behalf. These practices work because they align your heart and mind with the spiritual reality that Isaiah 41:10 declares to be true. They train you to live as though God's promises are actually operating in your life, rather than just existing as nice thoughts in your head. But I want to address something that might be creating resistance in your heart, as you consider implementing these practices. Maybe you're thinking, I've tried to be positive before and it didn't work. I've looked for God's help before and didn't find it. I've tried to trust His promises before and was disappointed. I understand that struggle because disappointment with God is one of the most painful experiences a believer can face. When we've prayed earnestly, trusted sincerely, and still watched things fall apart, it can create deep wounds in our ability to hope again. But here's what I've learned through my own journey of faith and through walking alongside others through their darkest seasons. God's faithfulness isn't invalidated by our inability to understand it. His promises don't become untrue because we can't see how He's fulfilling them. His presence doesn't disappear because we can't feel it. Sometimes the very experiences that seem to contradict God's promises are actually the ones through which He's fulfilling them in ways we never could have imagined. Sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually preparation. Sometimes what feels like delay is actually protection. Sometimes what appears to be denial is actually divine redirection towards something better than we originally requested. This doesn't mean that every disappointment has a neat explanation or that every loss will be immediately redeemed in ways we can understand. What it means is that our limited perspective doesn't invalidate God's unlimited faithfulness. I think about Mary, the mother of Jesus, who received the most incredible promise from an angel. She was told that she would give birth to the Messiah, the one who would save His people. But that promise came with a cost she never could have anticipated. She watched her son be misunderstood by his family, rejected by the religious leaders, abandoned by his followers, and ultimately crucified as a criminal. Standing at the foot of the cross, watching the promised Messiah die in agony, Mary could have easily concluded that God's promises were empty, that His faithfulness was conditional, that His love was unreliable. But 3 days later, everything she thought she understood about God's ways was transformed by resurrection power. What looked like the ultimate failure became the ultimate victory. What seemed like the end of hope became the beginning of eternal hope for all humanity. Mary's story teaches us that God's faithfulness often operates on a timeline and through methods that transcend our ability to understand them in the moment. His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts higher than our thoughts, and His purposes often unfold through circumstances that initially appear to contradict His promises. This is why Isaiah 41:10 begins with, "Fear not." God knows that His ways of working will sometimes be mysterious, confusing, even disturbing from our limited perspective. He knows that trusting His promises will require us to believe His character, even when we can't understand His methods. But He also knows that when we learn to walk in this kind of trust, when we discover what it means to rest in His presence, regardless of our circumstances, when we experience His strength in our weakness and His help in our need, we find a kind of security and peace that is completely independent of external conditions. This is the life that Isaiah 41:10 makes possible, not a life without challenges, but a life that remains unshaken in the midst of any challenge, not an existence without questions, but an experience where questions don't disturb your fundamental peace, not a journey without valleys, but a journey where valleys become places of deeper intimacy with the God who walks beside you. Every morning when you wake up, this reality is available to you. Every decision you face, this strength is accessible. Every challenge you encounter, this help is ready to manifest. Every moment when you feel like you're about to fall apart, this upholding power is prepared to sustain you. The question isn't whether God's promises are true. The question is whether you'll position yourself to experience their reality in your daily life. The invitation is extended. The resources are available. The power is accessible. All that remains is your willingness to step into the fullness of what He's made possible through His unfailing love and faithfulness. Fear not. These aren't just comforting words whispered in quiet moments when life feels overwhelming. This is a divine declaration that carries within it the power to completely transform how you experience every single day of your existence. But let me tell you something that might challenge everything you think you know about walking in faith. Most believers live as though God's promises are emergency provisions, stored away like a first aid kit to be used only when everything else has failed. They treat Isaiah 41:10 like a spiritual aspirin, something to take when the pain becomes unbearable. But what if I told you that this promise was designed to be the foundation for how you approach every ordinary Tuesday, every mundane conversation, every routine decision? What if God intended these words not as crisis intervention, but as daily empowerment? Think about how your life would change if you truly believed that the creator of the universe is personally invested in whether you have peace during your morning commute. Consider what would shift if you really understood that divine strength is available for that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Imagine how differently you'd approach your day if you knew that supernatural help is ready to manifest in your workplace conflicts, your parenting challenges, your financial decisions. Most of us have unconsciously divided our lives into two categories: the big things that are worthy of God's attention and the small things we should handle ourselves. We'll pray about major health crises, but worry alone about minor symptoms. We'll seek God's help with life-changing decisions, but struggle through daily frustrations in our own strength. But Isaiah 41:10 makes no such distinction. When God says, "Fear not," He's addressing every anxiety that robs your peace, from the panic that wakes you at 3 in the morning to the low-grade worry that hums in the background of your consciousness throughout the day. When He promises, "I am with you," He's speaking about His presence in boardroom meetings and kitchen conversations, in traffic jams and grocery store lines. Let me share something with you that revolutionized my understanding of this promise. I was talking with Elizabeth, a school teacher who had been struggling with classroom management issues that were making her question her calling. Every day felt like a battle just to maintain order, let alone actually teach. She was losing sleep, developing stress-related health problems, and considering leaving the profession she had once loved. "I keep praying for God to give me better students," she told me, "but nothing changes. These kids are just impossible." Elizabeth had fallen into the trap that catches many believers. She was asking God to change her circumstances rather than learning to access His resources within her circumstances. As we talked, I challenged Elizabeth to try something different. Instead of praying for different students, what if she started each day by specifically applying Isaiah 41:10 to her teaching situation? Instead of walking into her classroom hoping for the best, what if she entered knowing that divine strength, help, and upholding power were actively available for every interaction? The shift in Elizabeth's approach was subtle but profound. Before dealing with disruptive behavior, she would silently remind herself, "God is with me in this moment. He will strengthen me to respond with wisdom and patience." When facing particularly challenging students, instead of feeling overwhelmed, she would internally declare, "God will help me reach this child in ways I cannot imagine." Within weeks, Elizabeth noticed something remarkable. The students hadn't changed, but her capacity to handle them had been transformed. She found herself responding to chaos with calm, meeting defiance with compassion, addressing problems with creativity she didn't know she possessed. Her classroom didn't become perfect, but her experience of her classroom was completely different. "I realized," Elizabeth told me months later, "that I had been trying to teach 30 kids in my own strength when I could have been teaching them with divine assistance all along. The same God who created these children was willing to help me understand them, reach them, and love them well." This is the shift that Isaiah 41:10 makes possible in every area of your life. You don't have to wait for your circumstances to improve before you can experience peace. You don't have to solve all your problems before you can access God's strength. You don't have to have everything figured out before you can receive His help. Right now, in your current situation, with your present challenges facing your actual problems, divine resources are available. Not someday when you're more spiritual, not eventually when you have more faith, not later when you've proven yourself worthy. Right now. But here's what I've discovered through years of walking with people through their deepest struggles. Accessing these resources requires a fundamental shift in how we think about partnership with God. Most of us approach our relationship with Him as though we're supposed to handle the small things while He takes care of the big things. Or we act as though we should try our best in our own strength, and then call on Him when we reach the limits of our capability. But Isaiah 41:10 reveals a completely different model. It shows us a God who wants to be intimately involved in every detail, who desires to strengthen us before we feel weak, who longs to help us before we feel desperate, who is ready to uphold us before we start to fall. This kind of partnership requires what I call preemptive dependence. Instead of waiting until you're overwhelmed to seek God's help, you learn to access His resources as your first response rather than your last resort. Instead of trying to be strong enough on your own and then asking for divine assistance when you fail, You begin each challenge by acknowledging your need for supernatural enablement. Consider how this might transform your approach to a typical day. You wake up not with a mental list of everything you need to accomplish in your own strength, but with a conscious awareness that divine partnership is available for every task. You face your morning routine not as a series of mundane activities to get through, but as opportunities to practice the presence of God in ordinary moments. That difficult phone call you need to make. Instead of dreading it and rehearsing all the ways it could go wrong, you approach it with the confidence that divine wisdom will guide your words and supernatural grace will govern your tone. The financial pressure that's been weighing on your mind. Instead of losing sleep calculating and recalculating numbers, you rest in the assurance that the God who owns everything is personally committed to your provision. The relationship conflict that's been creating tension in your home, instead of avoiding the conversation or approaching it with defensiveness, you enter it knowing that divine love can flow through your words and supernatural. Understanding can bridge the gap between you and the other person. This isn't about becoming presumptuous or passive, expecting God to do everything while you do nothing. This is about discovering what it means to be yoked together with Him, working in partnership where His strength compensates for your weakness. His wisdom supplements your understanding. His love flows through your efforts. Jesus described this kind of partnership when He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." A yoke is designed for two, one experienced and strong, one learning and dependent. When you're properly yoked with Jesus, He carries the heavy end while you learn to walk in rhythm with His pace. This is what Isaiah 41:10 makes possible in practical terms. You don't have to carry the full weight of your responsibilities, your relationships, your struggles. You don't have to figure everything out in your own wisdom or handle everything in your own strength. You can learn to work in partnership with infinite resources, unlimited wisdom, and unfailing love. But let me address something that might be stirring in your heart as you hear this. Maybe you're thinking, "This sounds wonderful, but I've tried to depend on God before and felt like I was carrying everything alone. I've prayed for help and still felt overwhelmed. I've asked for strength and still felt weak." These feelings are valid, and they point to something important about how divine partnership actually works in human experience. God's help doesn't always feel like what we expect help to feel like. His strength doesn't always manifest as we think strength should manifest. His presence doesn't always register in ways that our emotions can immediately recognize. Sometimes God's help comes in the form of endurance when you thought you needed escape. Sometimes His strength is demonstrated through your ability to remain kind when everything in you wants to be harsh. Sometimes His presence is most real in the quiet moments when you feel most alone, speaking peace to your spirit in ways that transcend emotional awareness. I remember talking with David, a single father who was raising 3 teenagers after his wife's death. The daily logistics alone were overwhelming. School schedules, work demands, household management, emotional support for grieving kids who were acting out in unpredictable ways. David felt like he was failing at everything and couldn't see how God's promises applied to his chaotic reality. "I pray every morning," David told me, "but by 10 o'clock I'm already losing my patience, making mistakes, feeling like I'm drowning. Where's the strength God promised? Where's the help?" As we talked, I began to help David recognize something he had been missing. God's strength wasn't absent from his situation. It was manifesting in ways he hadn't learned to identify. The fact that he was still showing up for his kids every day, despite feeling inadequate, that was divine strength. The moments when he found patience he didn't know he had, that was supernatural help. The ability to keep going when everything in him wanted to quit, that was being upheld by God's righteous right hand. David had been looking for God's assistance to make his life easier, when God was actually providing assistance to make him stronger. He had been expecting divine help to solve his problems when God was giving him divine resources to navigate his problems with grace. Once David learned to recognize God's faithfulness in these more subtle forms, everything changed about his experience of single parenting. The challenges didn't disappear, but his capacity to meet them was transformed. He began to see each difficult day not as evidence that God wasn't helping, but as an opportunity to experience divine empowerment in ways he never could have imagined. This is why Isaiah 41:10 begins with redirecting our focus. "Fear not." The promise isn't that you won't face anything fearful. The promise is that you don't have to be controlled by fear when you face fearful things. Be not dismayed doesn't mean you won't encounter dismaying circumstances. It means you don't have to be broken down by dismaying circumstances. The strength, help, and upholding that God promises aren't always about changing your situation. Sometimes they're about changing you within your situation. Sometimes divine assistance looks like supernatural endurance. Sometimes heavenly help manifests as wisdom to navigate complexity. Sometimes being upheld by God's righteous right hand means maintaining hope when hope doesn't make logical sense. But here's what never changes: His presence, His commitment, His involvement in your daily reality. Whether you feel it or not, whether you see it or not, whether you understand it or not, the God of the universe is personally engaged with your situation. He's not watching from a distance to see how things turn out. He's actively working behind the scenes in ways that are perfectly coordinated with His love for you and His purposes for your life. This brings me to something I want you to understand about the phrase, "with my righteous right hand." In biblical times, the right hand represented not just power, but honor, authority, and intimate partnership. When someone sat at the right hand of a king, they had access to all the king's resources and shared in the king's authority. When God promises to uphold you with His righteous right hand, He's not just saying He'll keep you from falling. He's declaring that His power, His authority, His resources, and His honor are engaged on your behalf. Everything He is and everything He has is committed to your well-being. Think about what that means in practical terms. The same authority that commands galaxies is speaking order into your chaos. The same power that raises the dead is breathing life into your dreams. The same wisdom that governs the universe is available for your decisions. The same love that sent Jesus to the cross is surrounding you in this moment. When you begin to grasp the magnitude of what's being offered to you through Isaiah 41:10, it transforms how you approach every aspect of your life. You stop trying to manage your problems and start learning to access unlimited resources. You quit attempting to be adequate in your own strength and begin discovering what it means to be more than adequate through divine partnership. You cease worrying about whether you have what it takes and start resting in the assurance that God has what it takes and He's made it available to you. You no longer live as though your security depends on your circumstances, aligning with your preferences, but as someone whose security rests on the unchanging character of the one who has promised to be with you always. This is the life that Isaiah 41:10 makes possible. Not a life without challenges, but a life where challenges become opportunities to experience God's faithfulness in new ways. Not an existence without problems, but an experience where problems lose their power to determine your peace. Not a journey without questions, but a journey where questions don't disturb your fundamental confidence in God's goodness. Every single day, this reality is available to you. Every moment of uncertainty, this truth can anchor you. Every situation that threatens to overwhelm you, these resources can sustain you. The God who spoke these words thousands of years ago is speaking them to you right now in this moment for your specific situation. Fear not. He is with you. He is your God. He will strengthen you. He will help you. He will uphold you with His righteous right hand. These aren't just beautiful words to inspire you. They're spiritual realities waiting to be activated in your life through the simple act of believing they're true and positioning yourself to receive them. The invitation is extended, the promise is made, the power is available. All that remains is your willingness to step out of self-reliance and into divine partnership, to move from trying to handle everything in your own strength to learning to walk in His unlimited resources. Your life is about to change, not because your circumstances will necessarily become easier, but because you're about to discover that you have access to resources that make any circumstance manageable. You're about to learn what it means to live not as someone facing life's challenges alone, but as someone walking in partnership with the God who holds all things together. This is just the beginning of understanding what Isaiah 41:10 makes possible in your daily experience. As we continue to explore the depths of this promise, you'll discover that every word carries within it the potential to revolutionize how you think, how you respond to pressure, how you make decisions, and how you experience the very presence of God in your ordinary moments. The enemy of your soul wants you to believe that God's promises are like insurance policies, something you hope you never have to use, stored away for emergencies only. He wants you to think that divine resources are rationed, that you shouldn't bother God with small concerns, that you need to prove yourself worthy before accessing heavenly help. But what if everything you've been taught about when and how to apply God's promises has been backwards? What if the very mindset that saves His help for crisis moments is actually preventing you from experiencing the abundant life He intended for you to live every single day? I want to take you into a truth that most believers never discover, something that will completely transform how you understand your relationship with the Almighty. When God says, "I will strengthen you, yes, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand," He's not describing emergency services. He's describing your new normal. Think about a child walking with their father through a difficult path. The child doesn't wait until they're falling to reach for their father's hand. They don't try to prove they can handle the easy parts alone before asking for help with the hard parts. They simply walk hand in hand, receiving strength and guidance and protection as a natural part of the journey. This is the relationship Isaiah 41:10 reveals is available to you. Not occasional divine intervention when life becomes unbearable, but constant divine partnership that makes every moment bearable, every challenge manageable, every day an opportunity to experience God's faithfulness in fresh ways. Let me tell you about Marcus, a man who discovered this truth in the most unexpected way. Marcus was a mechanic who had worked at the same shop for 15 years, good at his job, reliable, respected by customers and co-workers alike. But Marcus had a secret struggle that was slowly eating away at his peace. Every morning he would wake up with a knot of anxiety in his stomach about the day ahead. Not because anything terrible was happening, but because he had developed a pattern of worry that had become so automatic he barely noticed it anymore. Will I make a mistake that costs the shop money? Will that difficult customer come in today? Will my back pain flare up again? Will there be enough work to keep everyone busy? These weren't life-threatening concerns, but they were life-draining. Marcus would lie in bed each morning mentally rehearsing everything that could go wrong, arriving at work already exhausted from battles he had fought in his mind before his day even began. One morning, Marcus's pastor mentioned Isaiah 41:10 during a brief devotional before the men's breakfast meeting. Not a deep theological exposition, just a simple reminder that God promises to be with us and strengthen us. But something about those words lodged in Marcus's heart in a way he couldn't explain. That afternoon, as Marcus felt his usual anxiety starting to build about a complicated repair job, he did something he had never done before. Right there under the hood of that car, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the garage, he whispered, "God, you said you'd strengthen me. I need your strength for this job right now." What happened next wasn't dramatic or mystical. Marcus didn't suddenly feel superhuman or experience some overwhelming spiritual sensation, but as he began working on that engine, he noticed something different. His hands were steadier. His mind was clearer. The problem that had seemed overwhelming moments before began to make sense as he looked at it. More importantly, the anxiety that usually accompanied difficult jobs was simply absent. Not because the job had become easier, but because he wasn't carrying the weight of it alone anymore. This small shift in how Marcus approached one repair job led to a complete transformation in how he approached every aspect of his work. Instead of starting each day with mental rehearsals of potential problems, he began each day with a simple acknowledgement. God, you're with me today. I receive your strength for whatever comes. The results were remarkable. Marcus found himself handling difficult customers with patience he didn't know he possessed. Complex repairs that would have previously left him frustrated became interesting puzzles he could solve with surprising clarity. The chronic back pain that had plagued him for years seemed to bother him less, not because it disappeared, but because he wasn't tensing up with anxiety about everything else. 6 months later, Marcus was promoted to shop manager. When I asked him what had changed, his answer was beautifully simple. I stopped trying to be strong enough for my job and started letting God be strong enough through me. Same job, same challenges, completely different experience. This is what Isaiah 41:10 makes possible when you understand it as a daily resource rather than an emergency backup plan. Marcus didn't need his circumstances to change before he could experience peace. He needed to change how he engaged with his circumstances, and peace became a natural byproduct. You see, most of us have been conditioned to believe that we should handle what we can and ask God to handle what we can't. We approach life like we're supposed to carry our own weight until we reach the breaking point, and then call for divine assistance. But notice the structure of God's promise in Isaiah 41:10. He doesn't say, try your best, and when you can't manage anymore, I'll step in. He says, I will strengthen you. Present tense, active voice, comprehensive coverage, not, I might strengthen you if you really need it, but I will strengthen you, period. This means that divine strength is already flowing toward your situation. Supernatural help is already available for your challenges. God's upholding power is already engaged on your behalf. The question isn't whether these resources exist. They do. The question is whether you'll position yourself to receive them. But how do you position yourself to receive something you can't see, touch, or measure? How do you access spiritual resources that don't operate according to physical laws? How do you partner with divine power that transcends human understanding? The answer lies in understanding something that revolutionized my own relationship with God. Faith is not believing hard enough to make God do what you want. Faith is aligning your heart with what God has already decided to do. When you read Isaiah 41:10, you're not reading about what God might be willing to do if you pray hard enough or have enough faith. You're reading a declaration of what He is already determined to do because of who He is and because of His love for you. He has already decided to be with you. He has already committed to being your God. He has already resolved to strengthen you, help you, and uphold you. These aren't possibilities waiting to be activated by your performance. These are realities waiting to be received through your trust. This understanding changes everything about how you approach both ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges. Instead of mustering up enough faith to convince God to help you, you simply acknowledge the help He's already providing. Instead of working, you recognize that you're never alone. Up enough courage to face difficult situations alone. Instead of trying to be strong enough for whatever comes your way, you learn to draw on strength that's already available. Instead of hoping God might intervene in your circumstances, you begin to cooperate with the intervention that's already taking place. Let me show you what this looks like in practical terms. You wake up tomorrow morning, and instead of immediately focusing on everything you need to accomplish in your own strength, you take 60 seconds to acknowledge the reality that divine partnership is available for every task ahead. God, you've promised to be with me today, and I receive that promise. You've committed to strengthening me, and I open my heart to that strength. You've declared that you will help me, and I expect that help to manifest in ways I might not even recognize. You've assured me that you will uphold me, and I rest in that assurance as I face whatever comes. This isn't a magical formula that guarantees everything will go perfectly. This is alignment with spiritual reality that positions you to experience God's faithfulness, however it chooses to manifest. That challenging conversation you need to have with your teenager. Instead of dreading it and hoping it, knowing that divine wisdom is for the best, you enter available for your words, and supernatural love can flow through your heart even when you're frustrated. The work presentation that's been causing you anxiety. Instead of rehearsing all the ways it could go wrong, you prepare thoroughly and then rest in the confidence that God's favor can open minds and hearts in ways your preparation alone never could. The financial pressure that keeps you awake at night. Instead of endlessly calculating numbers and wondering how you'll make it work, you do what you can practically while trusting that the God who owns everything is personally invested in your provision. Notice that this approach doesn't eliminate personal responsibility or replace practical action. You still have the conversation, you still prepare for the presentation, you still manage your finances wisely, but you do all of these things from a foundation of divine partnership rather than self-reliance. The difference is profound. When you're operating from self-reliance, the weight of every outcome rests on your shoulders. Your peace is held hostage by your performance. Your confidence rises and falls with your circumstances. Your security depends on your ability to control variables that are often beyond your control. But when you learn to operate from divine partnership, something extraordinary happens. You discover that you can give your best effort without being crushed by the pressure of perfect results. You can face uncertainty without being paralyzed by anxiety. You can encounter setbacks without losing hope. You begin to experience what Jesus meant when He said His yoke is easy and His burden is light. Not because following Him eliminates difficulty, but because following Him means you never carry difficulty alone. This brings us to something crucial that many believers misunderstand about God's promises. They think that claiming God's promises means demanding specific outcomes. They believe that standing on Scripture means insisting that God work according to their timeline and preferences. But Isaiah 41:10 doesn't promise that God will solve all your problems according to your specifications. It promises that He will be present in all your problems with resources that transcend your limitations. I will strengthen you doesn't guarantee that you'll never feel weak. It assures you that when weakness comes, divine strength is available. I will help you doesn't promise that everything will be easy. It declares that when things are difficult, supernatural assistance is accessible. I will uphold you doesn't mean you'll never experience pressure or even temporary failure. It means that when pressure threatens to crush you, and when failure tempts you to despair, God's sustaining power will maintain your hope, preserve your faith, and keep you moving forward. This is why the promise begins with, "Fear not." God knows that His ways of working will sometimes be mysterious. His timing will sometimes be different from ours. His methods will sometimes challenge our understanding. But He also knows that when we learn to trust His character, rather than demanding specific outcomes, we discover a peace that no circumstance can disturb. I think about Sarah, a nurse who worked in the intensive care unit of a major hospital. Every day, Sarah faced life and death situations that would overwhelm most people. The emotional weight of caring for critically ill patients, split-second decisions that could affect supporting grieving families, making someone's survival, it was more than any human should have to carry. For years, Sarah had compartmentalized her faith, treating it as something personal that helped her on Sundays, but had little relevance to her professional responsibilities. She prayed for her patients, of course, but she approached her work as though everything depended on her medical knowledge, her technical skills, her ability to stay calm under pressure. As you close your eyes tonight, I want you to carry these words with you. Fear not, for I am with you. Let them be the last thought that settles in your mind before sleep comes. And when you wake tomorrow morning, let them be the first truth that rises in your heart. You are not alone in this journey. The same God who spoke galaxies into existence has personally committed Himself to walking alongside you through every moment of uncertainty, every season of struggle, every challenge that tries to steal your peace. His strength is already flowing toward your situation. His help is already available for your needs, and His righteous right hand is already positioned to uphold you. Rest in this promise, beloved friend, and step boldly into the abundant life He has prepared for you.